On a bright June morning in coastal Maine, when the harbor wore a sheet of light and gulls sketched cursive over the water, Jonah Reed rolled open the door of his small boatworks and let the smell of cedar and salt meet the day. He was the kind of man who fixed things slowly and right, a carpenter of skiffs and quiet promises. He sharpened planes before coffee and believed that wood answered best to patience. The town of Spruce Harbor woke around him with clinks of halyards and the gossip of oars. A ferry bell marked time like a forgiving teacher. Tourists began to wander the wharf with cameras shaped like curiosity and sandals shaped like optimism. Jonah nodded hello to the day and to an old friend named Ruth, who ran the bait shop with the brisk sweetness of a woman who had survived enough winters to deserve June. That was when she walked down the dock with a straw hat in one hand and a folded map in the other. Her name was Emily Hart. She had flown in from Vancouver to spend 2 weeks with her aunt at a rented cottage, and the map had been her grandmother's. Emily looked like someone who had been brave for a long time and had just decided to be tender too. Her eyes held a kind of alert kindness. Her smile arrived slowly, as if asking permission to stay. She paused by the open door and said, "Excuse me, are you Jonah Reed?" And when he said yes, she said, "I wonder if you could help me with a favor I did not expect to ask." Jonah set down the plane as if it weighed more than steel. He wiped his hands on a rag. He said, "Tell me what you have." Emily unfolded the map, its edges soft with old handling. The paper wore the handwriting of somebody who liked to talk to the future. It showed the islands just off the harbor, drawn by a pen with a stubborn optimism. There were small stars and a phrase in the corner that read, "Not all treasure is buried. Some of it waits on benches with a good view." Emily said, "My grandmother May grew up here. She left when she was 19 and never stopped making tea that tasted like tide pools. She gave me this map before she died and said one day you will use it." And I thought she meant a metaphor. Now I think she meant a boat. Jonah smiled because metaphors are boats if you let them. He said, "What favor would make this map happier?" Emily said, "Would you take me to the places she circled? I will pay you. We can go slow. I do not know the tides or the weather, or which gulls tell the truth. I want to read the letters she wrote to me, but told me to open only when I reached each island. I'm scared to do it alone and too proud to ask my aunt. I am asking you because you look like someone who knows how to be quiet without leaving." Jonah felt the floor of the day tilt. Not like danger, like a boat easing off a mooring. He said, "I can take you this afternoon if you have decent shoes and a willingness to be surprised by water." She laughed in that half-surprised way that makes a morning become a day. She said, "I have both. Also ginger candies if the waves have opinions." They agreed on noon. Emily left to fetch a sweater and a journal. Jonah cleaned the skiff as if it were about to meet the kind of story it would tell to other boats later. He checked the fuel, the spare oar, the life jackets, the small jar of bolts that always saves a trip. He packed a thermos of coffee and 2 oranges that smelled like decisions. At noon, the harbor widened under a sun that practiced kindness. Emily stepped into the skiff with the balance of a person who trusts instructions. Jonah steadied her elbow without making a speech about it. They pushed off and the small engine suggested friendship. Out beyond the ferry route, the water wore a different mood. The kind that asks for attention and gives reward in return. A breeze combed the surface into small lines. Cormorants tried out pessimism and then flew anyway. Emily opened the first envelope, the paper thin as good memory. She read aloud to the air and to the man who had the oars nearby. The letter said, "Begin where the harbor learns courage. The bench under the spruce on Little Haven Island. It is where your grandfather asked me to stop pretending I did not love him. Bring a shell. Bring your listening. Bring your own life." Jonah guided the skiff toward Little Haven. He spoke in the language of channels and granite. He told her about the ledge called Widow's Smile, because it pretends to be gentle and is not. She told him about Vancouver rain that does not apologize, about a research job at a museum that pays in wonder, about a breakup that taught her how to rename quiet. They walked the island path under spruce that held the smell of good secrets. The bench waited where the letter had promised, a view wide enough to make room for grief and plans. Emily set a small shell on the weathered board and unfolded the next paper. It said, "Say his name, and then say your own as if you are both still learning. Then look for the small cairn we left near the path. Inside is a coin we found on a day that asked us to be brave. Keep it. Spend it on courage when you need it." She spoke her grandfather's name, Samuel, and her grandmother's name, May, and then her own, Emily, and her voice trembled like a violin trying to be strong. Jonah stood a respectful 2 paces away and looked at the horizon like it had asked for company. Emily found the cairn, the coin waited, she held it like a tiny sun. She smiled through something that was not quite tears. She said, "Thank you for standing there and not narrating." Jonah said boats learn early that narration can scare fish. People too. She laughed and the day went on. The second star on the map pointed them to Sparrow Key, a thumb of rock with tide pools and a single fir like a sentinel who forgot to retire. The letter there said, "We argued here about leaving and staying. We learned that love is not a map that erases places, but a map that draws bridges between them. Pick a rock and throw it as far as you can. Let it be the thing you release. Keep what returns." Emily chose a smooth grey stone and whispered a word into it. Jonah did not ask which. She threw it with a motion that healed something in the air. The splash said brave. The moment said true. She tucked a small piece of sea glass into her pocket. Jonah added a note to his own mind. That bravery sometimes looks like a woman throwing a stone, and then breathing better. As the afternoon tilted, a fog bank began to consider the idea of participation, a soft veil unfurling from the outer islands. Jonah checked the line of the far buoy and judged they had generous minutes. He asked if she wanted to continue to Starling Point or head back. Emily looked at the map, at the fog, at him. She said, "My grandmother liked to race weather, and also knew when to make soup. What do you suggest?" He said, "I suggest we stop at Starling Point for one promise, and then turn for home like people who respect fog and soup." They made the landing at Starling Point and climbed the low rocks to a patch of beach no bigger than a living room rug. The letter there said, "This is where we plan to be poor and happy, and will write most of the time." It said, "Make a plan you can change, and make a promise you will keep even when the plan changes." Emily held the note so gently the paper seemed to purr. She said, "I have been good at plans I can change and bad at promises to myself." Jonah said, "Promises to yourself are the most sacred kind of carpentry. They hold up the room where you live." She said, "Will you help me make one?" He said, "I can hold the string line while you decide. You must hammer the nail." She nodded and wrote in her journal with a seriousness that made the gulls quiet down. The fog reached them as they pushed off. The world narrowed to a velvet tunnel. Jonah's hands moved the tiller like a conversation with muscle memory. He watched the compass and listened to the bell of the can buoy. He asked Emily to sit near the bow and talk about something true to keep fear from inventing stories. She told him about May teaching her to sew and how the needle can look like danger and be a tool of mending. He told her about boats that look small and carry families through winters. About evenings when the shop smells like cedar and calm. By the time they saw the harbour bell, they were both a little braver and a little tired. Fog peels fear and leaves honesty. They tied up and walked the dock. Ruth called from the bait shop that they had earned chowder. They took bowls and sat on the steps like dock cats learning manners. Emily looked at Jonah over the steam and said thank you. Not just for the boat, for the silence, for the right questions. For that ridiculous phrase about sacred carpentry I am going to steal. He said, "Steal it. Just give it away again when you can." It likes circulation. The next day it rained like the weather wanted to teach rhythm. Emily came to the shop with brownies and questions. Jonah showed her the ribs of a skiff in progress. The way a plank bends if a person warms it with steam and patience, he said wood is like people. It refuses to be bullied and will accept a suggestion if you ask in its language. Emily touched the hull with reverent fingertips and said, I think my grandmother was right about benches with a view. I think some of the treasure is the company you find on the way there. They waited for the rain to loosen and then went out again between showers. They visited the last star on the first page of the map, a place called Lantern Cove where the stones hold heat and the water holds secrets. The letter there said, if you reach this point, bring your favorite song. Sing it badly but sincerely, leave a ribbon on the lowest branch. Tell the truth to somebody who will keep it and not own it. Emily sang a verse of a Joni Mitchell song as if she had been practicing courage since breakfast. Jonah left a ribbon with a knot he had learned from his father. Emily told a truth about being afraid she had been too late for her own life. Jonah answered with a truth about thinking love was something he had to earn by doing instead of by being. The cove held both truths like a bowl that does not spill. In the days that followed, the town learned their pattern and approved. Ruth kept a tab for their chowders and refused to say the number out loud. The ferry captain saluted them with 2 short honks that meant I see your story and I'm cheering. Tourists asked for directions and did not notice the softer looks passing between the boat builder and the traveler with the map. One afternoon, Emily's Aunt Lorraine asked Jonah in a voice woven from caution and affection, Do you know what you are doing? Jonah said mostly no, but the part I do know feels like yes. Lorraine smiled like a woman who remembers choosing. She handed him a bag of blueberries and said feed her courage and a little sugar. They both help. On the 6th day, Emily reached for the second page of the map and found a tiny photo tucked inside. May at 19 on the dock. A man beside her with a grin like wind. On the back, May had written for my granddaughter. When you find the bench that kept our secret, ask the man you trust to read this out loud. Emily looked at Jonah as if the day had asked a favor through her grandmother's hand. She handed him the photo without speaking. He read the letter aloud. It told a story of leaving with a suitcase and a promise, of wanting to stay and needing to go, of asking a boy to believe that love and distance can be relatives who eventually shake hands. At the end it said, if you are listening to this beside a good person, thank him for helping you arrive. Bring him a blackberry pie and one honest question. Emily breathed in, breathed out. She said, I do not have a pie. I have a question. Will you come with me tomorrow to the bench near the lighthouse at dusk and read the last letter? Jonah said yes, and the word tasted like ocean on a hot day. Salt and clean and necessary. The day of the lighthouse carried a blue worth saving in a jar. The wind settled just enough. They motored out and tied to a courtesy mooring. They walked up the path with the lighthouse perched like a lesson in attention. The bench sat where it had always sat. The last envelope waited in Emily's bag like a careful heart. She opened it, her hands steady now with practice. She read the first lines and then handed it to Jonah when May asked the man beside you to speak. He read, his voice softer than the wind. The letter said, Beloved, you are allowed to choose home as a verb. You are allowed to choose love as a daily craft. You are allowed to accept help without auditioning for worth. You are allowed to build a life that looks like the bench you are sitting on. Strong, simple, kind to the view. If the person reading this to you looks at you like the horizon finally learned your name, consider trusting that. Emily looked at Jonah and he looked at her and neither looked away. He said, I am trying to be brave in a new way. She said, me too. He said, I do not want to make your trip my story. I want to make our hours into a room where both of us can stand. She said, I have been afraid of asking for what I want. I want time. I want breakfast. I want to learn the names of your tools and your town, and the habits of your patients. He said, I want to learn your rain and your museum, and that way your voice holds a laugh before it leaves. They sat there until the light noticed and the tide turned and a child cried somewhere near the gift shop and then stopped because parents are miracles. They walked back to the skiff with a quiet that was not awkward. It was work. It was choosing. That night a storm teased the town and then apologized by raining gently. Jonah lay awake listening to the roof talk in the way roofs do and thought about being 24 and being 40, and about the days that taught him to carry his worth instead of chasing it. Emily lay awake at the cottage and listened to her aunt softly snoring in the room down the hall, and thought about benches and letters and the permission she had been given to be beloved and also to be herself. In the morning they decided to do something ordinary together. Coffee and the farmer's market and a hardware store. Argument about screws that turned into a comedy routine with Ruth as the audience judging honk. They bought blueberries and a small rosemary plant and a deck of playing cards in case the fog became social again. They met Nora and Sam, who had lived on the point since Sam could name the constellations. They listened to a teenager play fiddle in front of the library, like someone who had been practicing for this exact street. They chose a loaf of bread with a crust that spoke in complete sentences. In the afternoon they took the skiff to a cove that May had not marked. Emily said, "I want to make a star of my own." They climbed the rocks and found a flat place where the wind liked them. Emily wrote on a card from her journal a new instruction for a future granddaughter, or for nobody. It said, "Make a list of things you forgive yourself for, and another of things you want to learn twice, once by failing and once by listening. Tuck both lists under a stone shaped like a shoulder, and visit them when you feel like apologizing for existing." She tucked the card into a crack and put the stone on top like a signature. Jonah stood back and memorized the look on her face. The one that happens when a person becomes heft and light at once. The second week began to slip through their fingers in that way vacations do when something real has started. They took to eating dinner on the dock on evenings when the wind made the gulls opinionated. They shared a bowl of chowder and a paper basket of fries with malt vinegar. They told each other about first jobs and last arguments. They told stories that tasted like pie and stories that tasted like medicine. They let the other witness both. On Tuesday, Emily received an email from the museum about a grant proposal she had written in a mood of secret hope. The message said, "Funded with enthusiasm. Please return by July." She showed Jonah the screen with a smile that tried to be shy and failed. He lifted her hand and kissed the knuckles without making it into a speech. He said, "Congratulations." And his voice managed to say, "I am proud," without claiming any of it as his own. Emily said, "I want to finish the map and the letters, and then I will go back to Vancouver for the fall. But I do not want to leave this like a summer story that vanishes in September." He said, "Then let us not. Let us make plans that can survive an ocean and a season." She said May would approve. He said May has been stage managing this whole thing. They laughed and the gulls approved. They planned the last 3 stars. A cluster near Spruce Light where the rocks wore seaweed beards. A small beach pocket called Button Cove because children liked keeping it. And the ferry pier where May had left town once and returned later with a baby and a smile that forgave so much. Every place had a note. Every note had a task. Write a thank you to the tide. Skip a stone and forgive your worst poem. Ask the person beside you a question that will require a long answer. They did each thing as if it were a ceremony and not a performance. Jonah watched Emily become clearer in her own light. And Emily watched Jonah become softer without losing any strength. They stored the letters in a wooden box Jonah made from a board he had saved for 10 years without knowing why. He carved a small star on the lid, and a gull that looked more like affection than accuracy. Emily cried a little when she saw it, and he let the tears exist, without either offering a towel too soon or an explanation too late. On the last day before she was meant to fly home, the town gathered at the wharf for a small music night that felt like community learning to breathe in rhythm. Children ran in circles and fell down in forgiveness. An old couple danced a slow shuffle waltz between a coil of rope and a memory. Ruth set out a plate of brownies and declared them necessary. The ferry captain told the moon it was beautiful, and the moon pretended indifference. Jonah and Emily leaned against the piling and watched the water invent a new reflected sky. He said, "I want to ask something I am not good at asking. Will you come back in September and bring your work and your books and that cardigan that looks like a fog bank? Will you let this town be your relative and this dock be your favorite argument? Will you let me be your breakfast person and your spare oar?" Emily took a breath that pulled the whole harbor into her lungs. She said yes in a voice that knew the cost and loved the math anyway. She said, "I will go do my work and bring it back. I will learn your winter and you will learn my rain. We will practice being good before we try being great. We will keep May's bench clean and our secrets kinder than our stories." They kissed with the modesty of people who care about neighbors and also with the confidence of people who understand that love is public work as much as private feeling. The fiddler found a slower tune, and the gulls chose not to interrupt. Somewhere in the crowd, Ruth pretended to look away, and did not. The next morning, Emily boarded the small commuter flight with the box of letters in her carry-on and the coin in her pocket. Jonah stood by the chain link watching the plane move down the strip. An ache and a gratitude standing together like cousins who finally get along. He went back to the boatworks and planed aboard because work is a faithful animal that stays. He added a calendar to the wall and wrote September with a star. September came the way good things come. Not sneaky but not loud. Emily returned with 2 suitcases. One with clothes and one with books and a photograph from Vancouver of a rainy street, with a neon sign that read open. She moved into a small apartment over the bakery where mornings smell like forgiveness. She took the bus to the library to work part-time on a community history project, and the museum flew her back once a month to finish cataloguing. They learned the rhythm of time zones and time on the water. They purchased a better kettle and a sturdier umbrella. They taught the rosemary plant to live inside for a winter that turned each window into a painting. They kept visiting the map when days went loud. Sometimes just to sit on the bench at Little Haven and say each other's names like they were learning them again. Sometimes to throw another rock with a new word and watch it go down and make new rings. Sometimes to sing badly and leave a ribbon even when nobody told them to. They added their own small stars for places that had not been drawn by May. The bakery step where a neighbor told a story that saved somebody. The library corner where a teenager found a poem and found herself. The town office where Jonah argued gently for a public ramp so wheelchairs could meet boats without indignity. The winter beach where they brought soup in thermoses to the volunteers who watched the sea when it raised its voice. In late winter they sat at the kitchen table with space heater courage and sketched a life. Not a grand design. A serviceable blueprint. One column for work, one for rest, one for friends and stubborn kindness. They penciled in a trip to Vancouver in spring. A return to the harbour bench in summer. A promise to host a Sunday soup for anyone who wanted a warm bowl and a warmer seat. They wrote grocery lists and added flowers in the margin because the margin asked for something. They fought once about nothing because tired people sometimes throw small knives. They apologized like people who have read the manual. They learned to keep granola bars in the glove compartment. By the time the next June arrived, the map looked like a quilt. Their apartment looked like a book that had been read. The boatworks smelled like cedar and plans. The town knew how to say their names in one breath. And the bench on Little Haven felt like a living relative. On the anniversary of the first favor she asked him. They invited the town to Lantern Cove for a picnic that looked like a hymn. People brought blankets and courage and potato salad. The fiddler played the tune the gulls tolerate. Ruth baked a pie with blackberries that stained hands and made truth taste like dessert. The ferry captain told the sunset it was showing off, and the sunset agreed. Jonah and Emily stood on the rock with the map in one hand and the wooden box in the other. They read a few lines of May's first letter, and then Emily read the star she had written for herself. They thanked the bench, they thanked the people. They thanked the tide for doing its job. And then Jonah said, I have one more favor to ask if the day is willing. Will you marry me right here, next summer, with the town as our choir and the bench as our witness and the gulls as unruly flower girls? Emily laughed and cried and said yes, as if the harbor had always contained that word. The town cheered like weather deciding to be merciful. The map fluttered in the breeze like an old story learning a new ending. And the gulls pretended to object and then applauded with wings. They kissed in a way that made old people remember and young people take notes. And the cove breathed the kind of breath you can hear, long and grateful. From then forward, they made a practice of the life they had promised. They installed the public ramp Jonah had argued for, and watched a boy in a wheelchair roll onto a skiff and call the water by its first name. They catalogued oral histories with the library, and found a recording of May that made Emily sit down and laugh and cry at once. They started a winter letter club where neighbors wrote kind notes to strangers and left them in a box by the bait shop for anyone who needed to hear you are not late for your own life. They kept soup on the stove for storms and birthday candles in a drawer for surprises. They paid attention to names and tides and the way love asks you to show up for what you cannot fix. They learned the hard parts too. A February when the roof leaked and money ran like water. A October when Jonah's hand argued with a chisel and had to rest while bills were loud. A week when Emily felt like a museum with half its lights out. They held those weeks with both hands and set them down gently on the bench. They asked for help and accepted it. They said thank you and meant it. They learned to celebrate small solvable problems because they make you ready for the ones that are not. And whenever the harbor wanted to know how their story was going, it watched them walk down the dock with a thermos, the wooden box and the map. It watched them sit on the bench and say each other's names like prayer and joke and vow. It watched them sing badly and leave ribbons. It watched them throw rocks with forgiven words and bring the silence back to shore like a good catch. It watched them keep the promise May had written in the corner. Not all treasure is buried. Some of it waits on benches with a good view. The bootlace Jonah retired without asking made clear to them that being seen helps the day stand taller. The apron with a blackberry stain carried their plans that love is a craft practiced daily with small tools and honest rest. The compass card steady as Mercy listened without hurry, that soup is architecture for tired hours. The blueberry pie cooling on Ruth's sill gently insisted that forgiveness swings like a door once the hinge is oiled. The museum grant letter folded 4 times made clear to them that mornings are promises kept at night. The oarlock squeak that sounded like laughter asked them softly that apology sands along the grain, not against it. The welcome mat collecting sand kept telling them that grief can sit beside joy without stealing its chair. The oarlock squeak that sounded like laughter proved their patience that ordinary work is devotion breathing steadily. The welcome mat collecting sand brightened their courage that mornings are promises kept at night. The ladder borrowed from Ruth's cousin guarded their hours that names matter most when spoken carefully. The measuring tape nicked at 7 asked them softly that names matter most when spoken carefully. The harbor light schooling evenings promised them in small ways that soup is architecture for tired hours. The string line that refused to lie outlived their worry that mornings are promises kept at night. The compass card steady as Mercy steadied them without applause that rest is a duty not a luxury. The thermos lid that worked as a cup gently insisted that names matter most when spoken carefully. The rosemary plant apprenticing to the window light guarded their hours that names matter most when spoken carefully. The bench under the spruce carried their plans that soup is architecture for tired hours. The map crease repaired with careful tape invited them again that ordinary work is devotion breathing steadily. The can buoy ringing at fog's edge held them together that ordinary work is devotion breathing steadily. The bench under the spruce steadied them without applause that staying is a decision you renew. The jar of Bolt's saving trips quietly taught them that names matter most when spoken carefully. The chalkboard that said soup on Sunday steadied them without applause that grief can sit beside joy without stealing its chair. The chipped mug that poured second chances nudged them forward, that rest is a duty, not a luxury. The not May taught Samuel printed in pencil on the back of a recipe held them together, that staying is a decision you renew.